My husband, 35 male, and I, 33 female, have been married for 7 years. He's always been extra prone to illness, and I knew about it well before we got married. I didn't care about it either because I didn't mind taking care of him whenever he fell sick. More recently, a few months ago, my husband had a minor heart episode and had to be rushed to the hospital. He was diagnosed with heart arrhythmia, but we were told that it's nothing to worry about. He had to undergo surgery and was prescribed some medicines, along with implementing some lifestyle changes to make everything less stressful for him. He switched to working from home for half the week, and since he's in a higher position in the company, it's all right for him to do that. I run my own business, so I work from home anyway, and it's been nice to be spending so much time together. My husband's younger brother, 28 male, recently moved into an apartment closer to his workplace, which happens to be near our house, so he's been visiting quite often. My brother in law has always been a bit of a flirt, from what my husband told me, and has struggled with commitment. Even when my husband had brought me home for the first time, he tried to flirt with me as well until my husband playfully told him to stop that. He'd always compliment me whenever I visited, and I found that pretty sweet. Our relationship has been purely cordial and platonic, and I used to think of him as my younger brother too. However, ever since my husband had his heart episode, he's been cracking jokes that are really strange to me. He drops by for lunch and dinner quite often, and whenever my husband isn't around, he starts joking about how he feels like he's my husband now and that he'd totally step in and marry me if my husband passed away. I laughed it off the first few times, but it's been happening so often nowadays that it gets under my skin. Whenever he's sure that my husband cannot hear him, he starts talking about how nice it would be if it was just the two of us, and it just makes me feel weird and uneasy because he's a lot younger than me and I've always seen him as a brother. And more importantly, it really pisses me off that he's saying such things to me about his own brother when I know for a fact that my husband would do anything for him. I know he loves his younger brother a lot and wouldn't ever do or say anything to hurt him, but I can't say the same for my brother in law. Just last night, he'd come over for dinner and my husband had gone outside to take a work call. He was out there for a good 15 minutes and I was praying and hoping that my brother in law didn't say anything weird. But he, of course, he did. And this time, I don't know if I can just dismiss it as a silly joke and laugh it off. He said to me that whenever this heart thing got rid of his brother, he'd be more than happy to step into his shoes and be my husband, and he'd do a better job at it as well. He was smiling the entire time, as if it was some hilarious joke and not a very disturbing thing to say. I said nothing and served him dinner. For the rest of the evening, I didn't say a word to him until it was time to say goodbye when he was leaving. I guess he knew he'd crossed the line this time and didn't seem that talkative at dinner as well. Now, my husband isn't going anywhere for a long time, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure of that. I take great care of him and always ensure that he takes his medicines on time and doesn't stress too much, just so that he doesn't have another episode. Nobody really knows how scary that was for me, just not knowing what happened to my husband as he lay unconscious on the floor. And for my brother-in-law to joke about it so casually is just so incredibly insensitive. And I hate the fact that he's joking about his own brother dying, when we all know that my husband is a great brother and has always had his back. It's just so ungrateful and disgusting of him. I'm sure he doesn't even think about how hurt and betrayed my husband would feel if he were ever to find out about the kind of things he's been saying about him behind his back to his own wife. Moreover, I don't think the things he's been saying to me have just been jokes, and I think that to some degree at least, he's genuinely trying to get with me. It's just so inappropriate and makes me feel uncomfortable. The only reason I haven't said anything yet is that I don't want to stress my husband out by informing him of his beloved brother's jokes. I'm well aware of his condition, and I'm just so paranoid that I might trigger another episode or something by revealing this. I know that he'll be really hurt when he finds out about this, and I just don't want to be the one to have to put him through that. At the same time, I don't know how long I'll be able to put up with this behavior as well. I almost snapped and gave him a piece of my mind last night, but I stayed silent just to avoid any sort of drama. And on the off chance that he was actually just joking, I didn't want to tell my husband and come off as a total drama queen or whatever. But today, I finally told my husband what had been bothering me, and it was pretty emotional and messy for him. A few hours ago, he was telling me that his brother wouldn't come over for dinner the next week since he was going on a work trip, and I accidentally let out a sigh of relief. He heard that and asked me what that was about, and even though I was hesitant to tell him at first, I decided it was about time and I should stop trying so hard to protect him. So I sat him down and explained what had been happening these past few weeks whenever his brother had been dropping by. I told him about all the jokes that he'd been making and how they were making me uncomfortable, which is why I was glad that I wouldn't have to meet him for a week. He seemed really upset about all of this and eventually revealed to me that this wasn't even something new. Apparently, whenever he'd bring girlfriends home, they'd always tell him that his brother was trying to hit on them or get with them. He'd find their profiles online and send them weird texts and stuff. My husband had never addressed it or confronted him about it so that he wouldn't feel embarrassed or anything. He'd hoped that his brother would eventually grow out of it since both of them were in their 20s back then. But now he's married and well in his 30s. And even his brother is about to be 30 in a while, and he's still doing the same weird things that he used to. He was really disappointed by all of this and told me that he couldn't just let it pass anymore. My husband also asked me why I hadn't said anything about this earlier, since it's been happening for quite a while now, and I explained to him that the reason I was keeping this information from him was because I knew how much he loved his brother, and telling him this would definitely hurt him a lot, which is why I decided to just stay quiet and put up with it. That was quite emotional for both of us. And more so for him, since he knew that confronting his brother would forever change their relationship. But he told me that that was a risk that he was willing to take because he couldn't deal with the fact that my brother was making me so uncomfortable in spite of literally being married to him. He was obviously really hurt and angry, but he was still doing his best to deal with the situation as calmly as he possibly could. He decided to inform his brother through text that he was no longer welcome at our home anymore and that he hoped that this decision of ours would be respected. He's probably busy with work, so there's no response yet, but my husband has been really quiet since he sent that text. And then he told his mother, and it was really ugly. More so for me than for him, truth be told. His mother already had an inkling of the fact that there had been a fight between her sons and was going to ask him about it anyway, so when my husband called her, she was already prepared to ask what happened. When my husband said that he'd decided to cut his brother off since he'd been making insensitive jokes about his passing and trying to hit on his wife, which was making me uncomfortable, she was in total denial. She absolutely refused to believe the fact that her younger son would do such a thing, and just like his brother, she also tried to blame me for the situation. She had the audacity to suggest that maybe I'd been making all this stuff up just for attention and none of it had actually happened. My mother-in-law and I haven't ever been particularly close or anything, but she's never hated me either. It's mostly been a civil relationship, so I was really surprised that she'd say such an awful thing about me, but whatever. Needless to say, when she started saying stuff like this, my husband got pretty worked up. But luckily, I was right there beside him this time. Thankfully, he didn't allow himself to get too angry and controlled himself pretty well. He explained to his mother very politely that he believed his wife over his brother, since he knows how big of a flirt his brother is, and moreover, he trusts me implicitly, so it literally doesn't matter what she or anyone else thinks. Having said that, he hung up and kept his phone aside. But I've been thinking about it, and I feel like maybe I overreacted and it wasn't necessary to do something so extreme. Maybe I could have just told my husband to warn his brother or something. I guess my mother-in-law's words just got to me. So AITA for telling my husband about his brother's insensitive jokes and making him cut him off. Update 2. My brother-in-law finally saw that text and called my husband up. I didn't hear the initial bit of the conversation since I was in another room, but by the time I realized they were talking, it was already too late and my husband was shouting at the top of his voice. They were already in a heated argument and my husband was yelling at him about how he was an ungrateful brat and that he regretted ever trying to be good to him since he clearly didn't deserve it. I could see that he was getting really worked up and that was dangerous for his health, so I snatched the phone out of his hand and hung up. I couldn't believe that in spite of knowing about his heart condition, he didn't think about it, even once before getting into a fight with my husband. He knew that getting so riled up wasn't good for my husband at all, but he still instigated him into getting into this spat. By the time I'd taken my husband's phone away from him, he was already pretty pissed off, and just as I had feared, was having difficulty breathing, and there were beads of sweat lining his forehead. I had to make him take his emergency pills to calm him down and make sure that he was all right. I was furious that his idiotic brother had done something so damn stupid instead of just accepting his mistake and apologizing. After all, this whole situation was his own fault. And had he just been a decent person, none of this would have been happening at all. It's been half an hour now since this happened, and my husband is napping right now. I'm glad he's calmed down now and that I got to him in time. His phone is with me right now, and his brother is still texting him constantly about how he's blowing things up out of proportion and is even trying to make me out to be a drama queen like I'd feared he would. He's texting him saying that he was just joking and that I'm taking things out of context now just to stir up drama, whereas I was joking with him earlier. None of that is true. He probably can't tell the difference between an awkward laugh to diffuse a weird situation and genuine laughter, but whatever. I'm really annoyed that he's trying to turn my own husband against me when actually he's the one who started this whole thing with all this stupid and insensitive jokes. So yeah, whatever. I know that my husband knows the truth and knows who wants the best for him. Update 3. My husband woke up in a better mood today, and after breakfast we decided to have a conversation about the previous night. He told me that his brother had called him up to ask about that text, and initially he'd refused to bring up what the reason actually was, but his brother himself ended up asking if it was because of me. When my husband said yes, my brother started accusing me of being too touchy about stuff like this and said that I'd been joking about it with him, which was absolutely not true. My husband obviously refused to believe it, and then his brother made a remark about how he was choosing to believe a woman who'd been into him since the very first day over his own brother. That obviously really pissed my husband off, since I've never, ever shown even the slightest bit of romantic inclination towards his brother. And as a matter of fact, I've always considered him a brother. He's the creep who always been hitting on me and making advances towards me, so it was appalling that he tried to turn the tables and blame it all on me. My husband totally lost it, and that's when all the yelling began, which is when I intervened and took his phone away. He thanked me for being right on time because when the argument began, he'd already started feeling breathless and his chest had tightened. Had I not taken his phone away, maybe the situation would have escalated and his condition could have worsened. I was extremely annoyed that his brother was trying to blame me And not just that, he had no concern for his own brother's health either. He tried to lie to my husband and turn him against me, and was still actively lying to him through text since he wasn't aware that my husband's phone had been with me since the previous night. I told my husband that for his own good, we should go no contact with his brother, and he agreed with me. My husband has admitted that his brother's behavior has been unacceptable, and he himself doesn't feel like staying in touch with him either. He's blocked his brother on all social media and blocked his number as well. I knew that this would certainly have repercussions, especially when my mother-in-law found out, since she's pretty proud of the way she raised her sons to never compete against each other, and how her sons are the perfect examples of brotherhood. I knew she was not going to take this kindly, but that cannot be helped. Update 4. Once again, my mother-in-law decides to come after me and texted my husband to tell him that I was manipulating him for attention. But he had had enough and replied saying that it wasn't his fault. Her youngest son was just a bad person, and said that I meant the world to him and he believed my word over everyone else's. I was so proud of him and almost cried because of how he defended me. I felt truly lucky that my husband loved me enough to stand up against his own family for my sake. He also told me that if his mother speaks another word against me, then he won't hesitate to cut her off as well. I feel slightly guilty for not telling my husband how his brother had been behaving the very first time it happened, and then maybe things would have turned out differently, and I said the same thing to him as well. But he reassured me, saying that as far as his family goes, they definitely would have reacted in the same way regardless of when he confronted them. He admitted to me that his mother had always had a soft corner for her youngest son, and likewise his father had a soft spot for him, despite pretending that they were perfectly equal and there was no sibling rivalry between them. And his mother always acted as if his brother was a sweet little boy, even though she knew very well that he'd led on multiple women and then refused to commit to them. None of this had ever been addressed up until this point, but my husband believes that now it's high time that they stop acting like they're a perfect family. It's been a while since that phone call, and while he's stayed away from his phone, I can tell he's really disturbed right now. So I finally got to doing the special thing that I'd planned for him. He loves homemade fudge brownies, and especially the ones that I've made. So I've decided to make some of those for dessert, and I'm hoping that cheers him up a little. Update 5. A little more than a week had passed since the last update, and while I'd assumed that we could move on with our lives now, that changed yesterday. My brother-in-law came by again, and as soon as I opened the door, I told him to leave before my husband saw him, because that would probably lead to another fight, and I didn't want that for him. He refused to listen to me and barged in, demanding that my husband come out and speak to him about what had happened. My husband had been working, but as soon as he heard the commotion in the living room, he rushed out and was pretty confused when he saw his brother standing there, while I tried to tell him to get out and not instigate my husband. My brother-in-law told me to shut up, and that definitely got to my husband. He was already very annoyed with whatever his brother had done in the past, and he told him that he had no right to stand in my living room and tell me to shut up, as if I was the one stirring up drama for no reason. My husband told him that he was done giving me chances to improve himself because clearly he wasn't going to change, and that he needed to leave. His brother, however, refused to budge and said that they could still sort things out and my husband would regret cutting him out of his life over something I said. I could hardly believe that he had the audacity to stand right in front of me and tell my husband blatant lies about me. He said I was the one who couldn't be trusted and I was just making things up to make him jealous, since I was actually the one who'd been trying to hit on him initially, and when he threatened to tell on me, I flipped the narrative. By then, I was so disgusted and angry that I couldn't take it anymore, and screamed at him to get the hell out and never come back. I had to physically grab his arm, and even though I'm not as strong as him, I managed to somehow catch him off guard and push him out of the door. My husband was dumbstruck because I slammed the door in his face, and even though his brother kept yelling at him to open the door and talk to him, neither of us responded, and eventually he left. It's been a day since this happened, and I'm still really pissed off that he was trying to manipulate my husband like this. I've made up my mind that the next time he or anyone from my husband's family tries to harass or insult me, I'm not going to hold back at all and will make sure that I publicly humiliate them. I've had enough of their crap, and I'm not going to put up with any of this anymore. Even my husband thinks they're taking things too far and has told me that I can say and do whatever I want to. He won't mind, since his family is clearly trying to take advantage of our silence and kindness. So they'd better watch their backs before trying to create any more unnecessary drama. Update 6. A few hours ago, my mother-in-law took to Facebook to speak about how I'm forcing her 2 sons to fight over me because my life is just that sad. I showed the post to my husband, and he was even more furious than I was, and I had to actually talk him out of heading over to his parents' house to give his mother a piece of his mind. Instead, I told him that I could handle this and did what I'd been looking forward to ever since she tried to accuse me of making things up. I posted about every little thing that her youngest son had said and done throughout the years, and how he'd never failed to make me feel uncomfortable and betrayed his brother, and how my mother-in-law had decided to defend him instead of just believing me. Not only that, I also revealed how her youngest son had led on multiple ex-girlfriends and then refused to commit, and how in spite of knowing all about his tendency to break women's hearts, she'd constantly pretend that he was her perfect little boy instead of teaching him common human decency. I ended it by revealing that she and her other son could try to ruin my husband's marriage as much as they wanted to, but it wouldn't work because, unlike them, we were good people who actually had morals and values. I posted this a while back, and since then my mother-in-law and brother-in-law have been calling and texting my husband, demanding that I take that post down, but he's made it very clear that that's not going to happen. They had their chance to be good people and apologize, but they chose not to. Instead, they decided to drag this out, and so they deserved all the hate that they were getting from the rest of our relatives. Hopefully they've learnt their lesson now and will stop bothering me and my husband. Just to make sure that they get the message and leave us alone, we've decided to head to a nearby beach for a few days and cool off, since it's been quite intense and stressful these past few days. As for me, I'm just glad that I'm with my husband and we're both happy and healthy. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.